Great. Okay, what are we up to in the Torah? Anybody know?
Vayechi.
Vayechi. Vayechi is the last parasha in the book of Genesis, in the book of Bereshit. So as we do, we are first going to recap. I have my nice My Jewish Learning recap papers in front of me, in case I forget something. What is Vayechi about? What does Vayechi mean? It means, and he lived. Vayechi Yaakov, and he lived. So it's interesting that the parsha about Sarah passing away and about Yaakov passing away start with the word life, which is just an interesting comment that makes sense in the narrative, but just mentioning it. Okay, so what happens? Remember, Yaakov came down to Egypt, and he came with his whole family. They didn't leave anybody in Canaan because of the famine, and Yosef is the viceroy, and he has collected food, and that will keep his family alive and more. I'm just muting people with feedback, but of course you're welcome to unmute when you want to say something. He's now 17 years, just reminding people there's kind of a bookend here between the 17 years when Yosef disappeared from Jacob's life, Yaakov's life, highlands. And let me just say hello to people, actually. I can say hello to everybody. Faye, hello. Judy, Vivian, Ted, Robert, Moshe. Lance, welcome. I was wondering where you were. Another Robert and another Moshe. Just to confuse us. All good. Helen, Milton, good to see you. 59941. Welcome. And if you have a name or you want to change your name, that would be great. Moshe, welcoming you, and somebody in 646257. I don't know who that is, but you are very welcome to be a part of our class. Okay, Yaakov's, the first 17 years of Yosef's life, Yaakov, he lived with his father Yaakov, then he disappeared and was sold to Egypt by his brothers, lived there for 22 years, and then was reunited with his father, and his father died 17 years later. So it's a bookend of 17 years of Yaakov's life with Yosef, 17 years at the end of his life, in the middle 22 years when he mourned that Yosef was gone and perhaps thought that he was dead. We're not sure about that, but we think so because he was certainly mourning him. He calls his son Yosef. So, right, it's interesting. He doesn't call his other sons. And he says to him, because in a position of power, swear to me that you will not bury me in Egypt, but with my fathers in Canaan. And where is Yaakov buried? Not a trick question.
Machpelah.
Ma'arata Machpelah, the cave of our forefathers, and Machpelah. I think Machpelah is from Kaful double because everybody is buried with their spouse. Which spouse is buried with Yaakov?
Leah.
Leah. My second name is Leah. I'm always trying to reclaim her position. Look ahead. We will definitely do a unit on Leah at some point. No question in my mind. Yeah. 1 year when we decide to do personalities or relationships. It's not a bad idea, actually, for a class, personalities and relationships. And then we will definitely learn about Leah and Rachel. Anyway, Yaakov is buried with Leah. That is true. He calls to Yosef, who is Rachel's son, actually. And he says, he makes him swear that he will bury him in Canaan. We know that he did that. And then later on, Yaakov already knew, I guess, that he was going to die. Yosef brings his two sons to be blessed by Yaakov. Everybody remember the crossing of the hands? Yeah, I'm not going to discuss that, even though that has a lot of beautiful reasons and ideas, but this is not a class about that. And actually, Rav Stephen wrote a beautiful, beautiful custom. We're speaking about New Year's Eve in Ireland or something, or Scotland, where people cross their hands at the stroke of midnight. So we didn't talk about that, but he connected it to Yaakov in I really was blown away. I thought that was beautiful. So everybody, you can go back to Rev Stephen's Sunday morning daily email. If you did not see that, please read it because it was amazing. And he blesses Yaakov, he blesses his sons, Yosef, to be elevated. Remember, Menashe and Ephraim, there is no land in Israel that's called Yosef's area. There's Dan, there's Yehuda, there's Benjamin. There's no Yosef. Instead, there's Menashe and Ephraim, who are his children. They are elevated to the level of being a shevet, of being a tribe like Yaakov's sons, which means that Yosef is getting Shechem Echad al Achicha, he's getting an extra portion because both of his sons. Remember that, by the way. Who gets two portions according to halacha?
The eldest. Firstborn.
Exactly, the Bechor, remember that. And then He calls everybody together, all of his children. And can somebody, I don't mean for you to tell me exactly what he says, but any thoughts about the gist of what he's saying to his children? Any thoughts about that?
About what Yaakov is saying?
About the gist of what, Yaakov says to his children, because that's going to be related to our Haftarah.
It's not all positive.
It's not all positive. So he's giving them a little musar. He's giving them, this is something you should do better. Good. That's one thing, not all positive. What else, Vivian?
Also, he's very realistic about what kind of character, personality they have and what's for the
About
future.
their character and personality.
Based on their personality and how they've acted in the
Nice.
past. So he recalls the past, and then he looks forward to the future, which will be similar because based on their personalities.
Right. And anything else? Somebody, Milton, do you want to add something? No. And he does bless them. He does give them blessings. Let's not forget, there are also blessings in there. Judy, Judy, bavakasha, unmute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Does he also say anything regarding positive relations among the brothers after he's gone?
Huh. I'm looking. I don't see that.
Don't remember anything like that.
That's a great question, but I will hold that thought, Judy. By the way, Judy, we see your table. We don't see your face, just saying. But so it's a great question, and I have something to say about it, but I want to wait until we get to Haftarah. So if I don't say anything about it, Judy, please remind me. And so that more or less, that's what he does. He gives them, remember, you know how when we put up the tribes, we always have a symbol for each tribe. So some of those symbols come from these blessings. For example, Zvulun will dwell at a bay of seas. He will come a harbor for ships. So Zvulun is ships. Yisachar, a nimble beast of burden. I don't remember who he is actually, Yisachar. Dan is a serpent, which sounds negative, but actually here is meant to be positive. Gad, Naphtali is a gazelle. Remember, he's Dan. You know, by the way, that the Doar in Israel, like the United States Post, it's the post office. Their symbol is Dan, is the gazelle, the swiftness. Yes, that is the symbol of the post office. And Yosef and Binyamin is a wolf. So some of it, I think, comes from Moshe's blessings at the end of Moshe's life. Some of it comes from Yaakov's, those symbols. Some of them appear here. Okay, great. Continuing on, Yaakov passes away, and actually Yosef does bring his bones back, and he's given a lot of respect. There's embalming, more stuff. And then, remember, again, I don't know if this is connected to the Haftarah, but I know that this group often finds connections where I didn't find connections. After Yaakov is buried, what are the sons worried about?
Joseph.
That Yosef will now get maybe his revenge on
They're going to
them?
be put into slavery.
I'm sorry, what, Lance?
They're
That
going to be
what?
put into slavery.
That they'll be put into slavery?
Yes.
I don't know if they say
Chapter
that.
50, verse 18.
Yeah, what does it say?
You have it in front of you, right?
No, you do. You want to read
No, I
it?
don't, but I'll get it in front of me in a couple of minutes.
I'm amazed that you know what verse it is, though, if you didn't have it in front of you. That's
Well,
impressive.
the next two verses that are, in my view, the most important in the whole Torah.
Anyway, you can read that they thought they would be slaves. Actually, it says here saying, we are your slaves. And they say to Yosef something interesting. Our father said to please forgive the crimes of your brothers. We don't actually see Yaakov saying that. That's also interesting to me. But that's not something for this topic, but it's interesting that they say something to Yosef, which maybe Yaakov said, but we don't actually see Yaakov saying that. Somebody is speaking this feedback.
Okay, I have it.
Yeah, what do you want to read to us, Lance?
Yes. Okay. Verse 18. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? And then he said, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And the implication there is that the whole thing is God's plan.
No, that I agree. 1 second, slow down. I agree 1 second. But you said that they were worried he would make them slaves.
He said they are. He said they said
No,
they are.
they said we are your slaves. We are your servants. And Evan can be a
Joseph
servant or a
says,
slave.
no, don't be afraid that I'm going
Right,
to do that to
right.
you.
Okay. Great. No, that I have 100%. And don't be afraid. Thank you very much. Yes, I did have that. I just didn't have where they thought I wonder though, if it's a psychological kind of subconscious that they said, we are your servants, we are your slaves. I say, you don't have to make us into slaves. We're already willing to serve you. So maybe that speaks to what you said, Lance. Okay. And
for
then
me, Rabbanit Bracha, quickly, for me, the key is Joseph, as in the case of the interpretation of dreams, is not taking responsibility for what's happened. He is putting that responsibility on God.
oh, that's very interesting. I'm sorry we're not having a Torah class because that would be very interesting to pursue. But I want to move on to the Haftarah. But I don't want to talk about that now because I don't think we'll have time to get to the Haftarah. Okay?
Yeah,
No problem.
Thank you. But that's very interesting what you said. Vivian, did you want to add something?
yeah, I was just looking at the next sentence or the next pasuk. They're talking about the grandchildren, Yosef's grandchildren, and that's and so you see that this is going to be the beginning of a rather long time that they're going to be in Egypt. And
Wait a minute.
back to the
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Yep. Very
Yeah.
nice. Because he saw the third generation, meaning Ephraim and his children. Beautiful.
Yeah, so his children and his grandchildren. So it's going to go on for at least several generations before anything changes. They're going to be in Egypt.
Nice. Okay. Thank you. That's a very interesting point also. And then what happens? Yosef actually dies. Now he's the youngest or almost the youngest, and yet seems to be he dies before the others. And he asks again, the same that Yaakov asked from him. He asked his brothers to swear that they will take his bones back and bury it at Eretz Canaan. I think that's so beautiful, by the way, that they just feel so connected to family and lineage, and they don't want to feel like a stranger forever. There's something quite beautiful about that. Okay, and he died at age 110, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, now we're going to the Haftarah because that is what this class is about, but we want to know the connection. All right, I'm going to, in a moment, find the Svarya source that I brought up. Here it is. People can see what's on the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, got thumbs up? Great. Is it large enough? It's pretty large, the Svarya text. Okay. Vayikrevu yemei David lamut. So I didn't put up the Hebrew, but guess what? The exact same thing is written about Yaakov. Vayikrevu yemei Yaakov lamut. And the days of David's life. So the literal translation, my friends, is they drew near. Karov means near. They became near. I mean, I understand it's a translation that makes sense in English, but just the literal. The days of David were drawing to a close or came closer to him dying. The exact same words are used for Yaakov. And the Midrash tells us that it's not often that particular verse is used, and it's used for both Yaakov and for David. I mean, that's a clear connection. We're going to see another connection in a couple of minutes where they're leaving some legacy. Oh, this is something I was going to say before. You know, some people say that, what was Yaakov leaving a will? Was he leaving? What was he leaving to his children? So to me, it feels like an ethical and spiritual will, as opposed to his possessions just seemed obvious that they'd be divided among his children. It's so, except that it was a much greater legacy because he's actually telling Yosef, my future possessions, meaning when you come back to Israel and God gives you the land, your children will get double. Do people follow that? It's not like, this is what's in my bank account, or here's my suitcase full of gold. He's actually bequeathing them physicality that he sort of doesn't own yet, but that God promised him. But he's leaving them, as Ted and Vivian pointed out, an ethical and spiritual will. Okay, I forgot to say that's something I wanted to mention. Do people not agree with me? You're welcome to say something. That is what I took away from the Parsha. Anybody have other thoughts? You're welcome to say. Okay, the Midrash says that when those particular words are used, Vayikrevu yemei somebody lamut, and the days of X were close to dying, that it's only used when that person dies before the time of his or her father or parent. So in this case, it's son and father. So I don't think it's written anywhere about a woman, but women aren't exactly featured prominently in the Torah or in the Tanakh, I would say, not prominently. They are featured, but not prominently. Yaakov died at 147. His father, Yitzchak, died at 180. His own father died at 175. It could have said that about Yitzchak. No, Yitzchak lived longer than his father, which is the way sort of it should be, but it doesn't always happen. And the Midrash says not, one second, and then David lived till 70. People know that? He lived only till the ripe age of 70. There's a Midrash that says he wasn't supposed to live at all, and Adam HaRishon gave him 70 years. We're not going into that, but it's just a Midrash that appears, and one could make probably a whole Dvar Torah on that. Anyway, his father lived 400 years. His grandfather lived 400 years. His great-grandfather lived 400 years. So David also did not live as long as his parent. Now, I'm not going into specifically the reason because I don't know necessarily the reason. That would probably require looking into commentaries, thinking about it. But it feels like a slightly judgmental way of saying it, meaning your days are coming to a close and what's missing is, but they shouldn't have. You should have lived at least as long as your father. And then the question is, why didn't you live as long as your father? Vayechi. And the Midrash goes on to mention that when somebody's parent dies, now I'm not talking about unusual circumstances, it could be somebody's in utero and their parent sadly was killed. I mean, there are many unusual circumstances, but let's talk about more the usual. I mean, my own father died at age 60. I know that for myself, when I started getting close to age 60, that felt like an auspicious time. And when I surpassed 60, that felt very auspicious. In fact, I have a brother who died at the same age. So, genes, genetics, I don't know. The Midrash says that's a time for us to take stock of our life. When we come within 5 years plus minus of our parent, let's make it more general, of our parent, it's an auspicious time for us to think about our lives. What have we gotten to? What have we accomplished? Think about ourselves compared to our parent. And I always keep in mind the fact that people may have had complicated or contentious relationships with their parents. It's not like everybody has a warm, loving relationship with their parent. So I don't know, and I'm not asking people here to talk about that. But even if I didn't have a good relationship, but I have learned from that, and therefore I will have a good relationship with my own children, or I will repair my relationships. That's also something for us to take. So I think no matter what, we always have something we could learn and think about. So I just wanted to mention that Yaakov and David, if we're talking about parallelisms between the Torah reading and the Haftarah reading, it's not just that these two leaders of our people were getting close to when they were dying. It's not only that they gather child or children around them, it's also that they both did not live as long as their parents, and this was perhaps influencing what they were thinking. Any comments before we continue? Okay, here's another thing that I read about that seems so interesting. It doesn't say, Vayikrevu Yemei HaMelech David Lamut. It doesn't say that the days of the king of David were drawing close to when he was dying, but just David. So any thoughts about that?
I don't know.
Yes,
I'll
Vivian.
try. It's sort of a measure of equality. No matter who you are, eventually you're going to die. And if you're the king or the slave or whoever, it's all humans have something parallel about them. All
Beautiful.
the same. Yeah, they're all
Beautiful
human.
learning.
And you need to think of each and every human being as a human being, and with certain rights and privileges and honors and respect and different things that are positive. Not only the king, but everybody.
Beautiful. Even though we do know that, royalty and others are laid in state, that is true. I'm not saying in Judaism that's true, but in others. But what Vivian is pointing out is something just really beautiful, that at the end of one's life, one is just oneself. Yes, Judy, dear, thank you. You have something to add, Judy? Because you did raise your hand. Judy follows Zoom etiquette. You have to unmute, and if you unmute, just you can see on your microphone, you're still muted because it's red. So when you unmute, you can say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, we learned that David Melech Chai V'Kayam. So the
David
Melech
Melech Yisrael Chai v'kayam.
is right. Okay, thank you. So his Melechness lasts forever. His king, the king aspect of David is everlasting. So
Beautiful.
that's different than the person David.
So thank you. First of all, his kingdom, his kingship lasts. Beautiful. Yes. So the Melech continues on. Very nice. And another thing is that we learn is that tzaddikim, we have a teaching that righteous or good people don't really die. So, I mean, they die, their physical bodies die. Let's put the Lubavitcher Rebbe aside. I'm not going into that whole thing, but I don't like to enter that or bring that. So just don't bring it into discussion because I will not have an answer for that. But we, even though the physical bodies die, why is it that we say that tzaddikim don't die? Any thoughts about why? Tzaddikim, let's just move it from, righteous or only to good people. Why could we imagine that good people are not considered that they ever die? In Judaism, by the way. I don't know about other faiths. Yes, Judy, go.
Okay, I know this is from Rabbi Weiss. He said a person, the body dies, but the neshama lives forever. So Kal v'chomer, a tzaddik, his neshama lasts forever.
Well, so I take a little bit of, I will a little bit push back, especially going to what Vivian said. If everybody's neshama lives forever, Kal v'chomer tzaddik. I mean, if everybody's lives forever, everybody lives forever.
Okay.
That's what I think. But I will say a Kal v'chomer in a different way. And so I'm not refuting the Kal v'chomer, but if everybody's is, then everybody's is. And it's hard for us to know because none of us have come back from the afterlife. But the what we believe in Judaism, or at least what this adage, is that how you say it? This thing about tzaddikim living forever, is that if somebody's children, or I would even argue people who want influence, not everybody has biological children, but everybody has people who they interacted with. And if the legacy of the values, I would even say, of Judaism, although I think this is more talking about mitzvot, lives on, then that person's legacy lives forever. And that's how that person doesn't die. And I think that speaks to David and Yaakov, who are both imparting what they think is important to close things up, to pass things on. And now let's go in and see what that is. All of that was just the first few words. But important.
Another thought on that.
Yes, Judy.
Okay, the other thought is the tzaddik lasts forever, but the tzidkaniut, the righteousness, that lasts forever.
Okay, that's nice. So the good parts, good. Vayitzav et Shlomo bino lemor. I want to ask this group, who knows how old Shlomo was? Piece of trivia. Anybody here know how old he was at this moment when he called him near? Take a guess. How many jelly beans in the jar? We know David is 70, okay? So that's using that as a starting point. And Shlomo, do we know where he was in his number? He had a lot of children. Anybody know? I was so surprised, by the way. He was 12.
Oh.
And he was already designated to be the king. So already we're seeing a parallel. Because Shlomo is his youngest or close to youngest, he's going to receive, theoretically, the Bechorah. Ted, Milton both said, what does the Bechor get? Sorry, who gets double? The Bechor. The elder receives the most, or it has first choice, or choice of first refusal, whatever you want to call it. Shlomo is going to, we all know that Solomon inherited the kingship. I mean, I'm not like revealing something here. And it says so at the end of this chapter that we're going, or at the end of the Haftarah. But also Yosef was almost the youngest of Yaakov's children, also seems to, at least at this point, receive special merit, special mention. He only calls Yosef with his sons and gives him this double portion. So already we see a second parallel. And we haven't even gotten to the second pasuk. And he says to him, Anochi holech b'derech kol haaretz, I'm about to die, as Vivian said, as everybody, the way of everybody on earth. So here's something I want to point out. V'chazakta, you shall be strong. V'hayita leish. First of all, show yourself as a man. You shall be a man. I just love that. Whatever that means. Ish often means an angel, but often means somebody who's a good person, like a mensch. That's the way I would say it. I love that word. V'chazakta, one of the commentaries pointed out, is so appropriate for this Shabbat of Vayechi. Why?
Right. Because if we end with chazak, chazak, chazak.
Yes, we say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. So how beautiful, what another, look at this, just in the first two psukim, we already see some beautiful parallelisms. And it's so nice that I would not have noticed that if that person had not popped it out for me, that v'chazakta, you shall be strong. And then we could continue by saying when the legacy that David is going to leave is to follow in God's ways. And that is a way for us to be strong when we follow in God's ways, in addition to being together. Okay. It is a short Haftarah. Okay, so first thing he says, this first spiritual legacy is keep the charge of the Lord, walking in the Lord's ways, following the Lord's laws, the Lord's commandments, the Lord's rules, the Lord's admonitions as recorded in the teaching of Moshe, so connecting him back to Moshe Rabbeinu, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Ve'et kol asher tifneh sham. So again, look at this pasuk, and I want to zoom in on the very last phrase. What could that mean? Any thoughts? It's an unusual phrase. What does that mean, everywhere you turn, as opposed to everything you'll do? What would be the difference between ta'aseh, you will do, tifneh, you will turn?
Just a thought.
I think yeah.
Oh, wait. 1 second, Vivian. Somebody else was speaking. Faye.
Sorry.
Yeah. It might be referring to the fact that there are outside influences. It's like wherever you turn, you see something different, and he's being told to take care, to stay on the path despite any other outside distractions.
Beautiful. And it could be also, I'm just thinking what you're saying, when you turn to your advisors to be careful, that could also be you turn to something. Could be, I don't know if that's what you were saying. That's what came up for me. Vivian, you want to add to that? Thank you, Faye. Vivian and then Helen.
I was thinking of the word tifneh, like when you turn this way, turn that way. It's before you start doing anything, you have to be careful.
Nice.
You have to anticipate what it might lead to. That one thing might lead to something. And that, so it starts.
So even before everything you do, but also when you have to think about it and before you do it. Very nice.
What will be the result of what you do and how that will affect further activities that you do. So don't wait until things are happening, but anticipate them beforehand.
But it's also about connecting back to God. So using God's commandments before you even do. Helen.
Vivian said.
What Vivian said? Oh, okay. Next time, Vivian, I'll have to cut you earlier to speak because you said, okay. It's nice that she agrees. Yes, Judy.
Okay, where in the Torah, in addition to in Shemot, it says Moshe Panah, he turned here and there. Where else, please remind me, is the term used until this point?
So I can't tell you every time, but it is true. I believe that it's used when he turned aside to see the burning bush.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So that's interesting also. Milton.
When we do the Shemona Esra, for instance, we take some steps back and say Oseh Shalom, and you turn to the left.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's beautiful. So you turn this way, Oseh Shalom Rabbi, Oseh Shalom Aleinu. That's really nice. Okay. Now you gave me something to think of when I come back after Shemona Esrei. I love that. Okay. Beautiful. The other thought here was that ta'aseh are things that are obvious you should do, but a king has the ability to do things out of the norm. So out of the norm, and when you turn to do those things out of the norm, you should also keep God's thoughts. So I think it's similar to what we said, but very nice. All really Nice thoughts, and I'm appreciating that. Thank you, Faye, for starting us off. Okay, then the Lord, David is telling Shlomo, then the Lord will fulfill the promise that God made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. Okay. So that's his ethical, I think that's what he's giving him ethically, spiritually, religiously, continue in the path. God will continue. Now he gives him very specific instructions. He talks about Yoav. Now, I have a grandson, Yoav. It's a very popular name in Israel for a boy. And it's supposed to be a heroic name, but Yoav actually did some things that were kind of dubious and not completely good, which we learn about here. You know what Yoav, the son of Tsuria, did to me? So first of all, that's interesting. Did to me, Asher Asali. And that's something that I can explain about in a minute. What he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, the Avner ben Ner and Amasa ben Yeter Vayahargem. He actually killed them. What does this say? Oh, never mind. Sheri, that's not helpful. Staining the girdle of his loins and sandals of his feet with the blood of war. Yoav had brought blood guilt on David's house. Interesting. So who knows? Anybody here know the story of how Yoav killed these two people?
Yeah.
Yeah, Vivian.
Yeah, he put them in the line of war so that they should be killed.
That was Uriah.
What?
That was Uriah, who was Bathsheba's husband.
Yeah.
He killed these people personally.
Personally, oh.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly.
Yep, that's a different story. By the way, that story will come up after. That story is also, that's what David says you did to me. So I'll just tell that story. That David wanted Bathsheba, and he asked Yoav to send a bunch of soldiers out, including Uriah. And I think it's Uriah, if I got that right.
Yeah.
And according to this, one minute, wrong parsha. When people came back to Yoav and said to him, why did you put him in the line of fire and he was killed? He pulled out the private letter from David and showed them and said, well, David asked me to do this, and that brought shame on the house of David. So it's a little hard to know, because the truth is Yoav did it on David's request. So that feels a little iffy to me. However, the fact that he killed the two of them, so hold on one second.
There's
There was
another.
rebellion by the other son of David, who declared himself king.
Yeah, what about that? Go on, Moshe, and then Ted. Yeah, go on.
That's when he killed the heads of the armies.
Correct.
Of the other son.
Correct. Yes, Ted, did you want to add to that, or do you want to say that?
Well, part of what's going on here is the difficulty of being a moral king and yet doing what kings have to do. Yoav was very much a proponent of what they call realpolitik, that is, doing what you have to do no matter what. So when Absalom rebels against David, David says, don't hurt him, right? Remember, he's my son, protect him. And Yoav knows that Absalom, if he lives, is always a threat. So Absalom is there hanging by his hair from a tree. One of the disadvantages, by the way, of having hair. And
I'll keep that in
I'd like
mind.
to point that out.
Maybe only when you're on a horse, though, Ted.
No, anytime. But Yoav kills him.
Wait, but he killed Amasa and Avner. He also killed Absalom?
Yeah. Against David's wishes.
Well,
David
that's not what he refers to here, because here he's speaking specifically about Avner ben Ner and Amasa ben Yeter. That's what he says in Pasuk 5, in verse 5. You know what Yoav ben Tzruya did to me, what he did to the two generals of Israel, Avner ben Ner and Amasa ben Yeter. So I'll just read to you the historical background. So hold on one second. Yoav was the general, he also that. I'll turn some more time. Avner ben Ner had been Shaul HaMelech's general. After Shaul's death, rather than accept David's bid for kingdom, Avner attempted to bolster the reign of Shaul's son Ishbosheth. When he realized that he did not have what it takes to be king, Avner offered David his support. In order to unite the nation, David offered to make him his general. When Yoav heard of this agreement, he protested that Avner had ulterior motives and that he meant to betray David. Yoav met up with Avner and, under the guise of drawing him off to a private conversation, stabbed him in the gut. At the time, David disciplined Yoav for making him look like he assassinates his enemies, but not for the murder himself. He, at the time, believed that Yoav's motives were national, not personal, until Yoav did the same exact thing to Amasa. I think Ted's going to look up about Absalom. Near the end, I'm not saying he didn't, I just didn't see that here. Near the end of David's life, his son Absalom rebelled against him. So that we know about, because remember, we learned that Haftarah. Remember, we learned that Haftarah, that Bathsheba came in and she brought in the prophet and they convinced David to, remember that when he was, remember that 3 weeks ago? I guess not. Gathering support of many factions in Israel, Absalom did this, and marching on to Yerushalayim to take his father's throne by force. The rebellion was short-lived, but it exposed a potential rift, and to heal that rift, David offered Absalom's general Amasa to take Yoav's place. Yoav met up with Amasa and, under the guise of greeting him, stabbed him in the gut. And that's when David realizes, well, maybe Yoav isn't doing things only for national motives, but also for personal motives. Ted, you'll let us know in a minute about what you look up. But here's the interesting question. Why do we think David did not discipline Yoav in his lifetime and left it for Shlomo? Any thoughts about that? He tells Shlomo, don't let him, lo tored sevato b'shalom sheol. Don't let him go down in peace to his grave. He has to know that he made a mistake.
Wasn't he very popular?
Wasn't he what?
Popular. That David didn't. Yeah.
And if he was, go on. What?
Well, David couldn't get rid of him if he.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were answering that question. Yes, he was popular. Correct. And he was a good general, turns out. That was what Ted was saying. He was actually really good at what he did. And unless he had somebody to replace him. Go on, Moshe, yeah?
I'm just saying he had the support of the army.
Yeah, he had the support of the army. Right.
So if David would have done something to him, David would have been in trouble with the army.
Right, exactly. Yep, that's a very good reason, and that is a reason quoted. So these are tactical reasons, but he knows that Shlomo might have trouble, and he wants to make sure that Shlomo exerts his authority. So where is that similar to our Torah portion? Any thoughts? And you guys touched on it a little bit.
Levi and Shimon.
Levi and Shimon, go on. What?
With, what's his name? Shechem.
Shechem, yeah. Right, so can you say a teeny bit more to show the connection?
Well, Yaakov makes a deal that Shechem and all of the people all of the men will be circumcised, and Levi and Shimon take advantage of that and kill them.
Right, but what, right, and what's correct, but where's that connected?
Yaakov is not happy about that. He says, you've made me stink in the nostrils of our neighbors. And he refers to it in what he says in Vayechi.
He refers to it here, correct, but I was thinking the similarity is he didn't discipline them in his lifetime. And right. Here it comes up. Same thing with Reuven. There was a pasuk about Reuven sleeping with his father's concubine, or that's what it says, Vayishkav, but he definitely did something inappropriate. And it doesn't look like Yaakov did anything about it in his lifetime, but on his deathbed, he mentioned it, and he, I guess, chastises him. And that seems similar, that there was unfinished business in David's lifetime and Yaakov's lifetime, that on their deathbed, they choose to, yes, Moshe, please.
Sorry, didn't Yaakov then say, Yaakov Shamar et hadavar?
No, I thought that was about Shimon and Levi. He definitely said that about Yosef, when Yosef brought Dibatam Ra'ah.
In both cases.
Moshe, let us know.
I think in both cases.
It could be. If you find it, let us know, okay? Be happy to hear it. So what does Shamarat Hadavar means? He kept it, he preserved it, and he actually preserved it till he passed away. And there's interestingly 4 reasons that I read about why people might keep something like that until they pass away. Any thoughts? Vivian, you have a thought? Like, it's a hard thing. Do you want to tell people in the life? Like, on one hand, we say, don't let things come between you. And if something is in your heart, you got to let it out to be able to move on. But here, Yaakov chose to do it on his deathbed. And is that leaving Reuven feeling bad about himself, feeling good about himself? And yet, so some of the things that I read is because he didn't want to alienate Reuven. He didn't want it to create a rift between them, but I hope he left him with a feeling like, I forgive you, or closeness. From one of the things that I read, it's that clearly Yaakov kept everybody in the fold, even when he chastised them. Even when he said, Shimon and Levi, you aren't good together, or you're too violent together. Even when he said, Reuven, you made mistakes, he kept them together. And that is a legacy. So somebody asked if Judy, if he specifically said, I want you all to be together, but maybe he didn't say it, but by including everybody, even those who he chastises, he is giving that legacy. Yes, Moshe?
It's in Breshit, Lamed Zayin, Pasuk 11.
Yeah.
V'yikanu bo echav, v'aviv shamar et hadavar.
Right, that's at the beginning when they're jealous.
Yosef bringing the tattling on the
Right, but yeah. But is there, no, that we know, but is there also what you said for other places?
Oh yeah, it's when Shimon and Levi.
So he says it there too, so that's the part that I didn't remember exactly.
I have to look it
You
up.
can look it up. You can look up. All right, let's continue with the thing. Very nice. Okay. So we know Shlomo was considered wise, acted in accordance with your wisdom. See that his white hair, meaning at the end of his life, he knows that he did it wrong. And continuing, deal graciously with them. They befriended me when I fled your brother Avshalom, because they protected him when he was. And this is, okay, nothing addition here. You must also deal with somebody else. Shimei, the son of Gerah, the Benjamini. Remember, Yamini was also Mordechai. He insulted me outrageously when I was on my way to Machanaim, but he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him, I will not put you to the sword. So it seemed like he did something inappropriate. I want to read that to you just a minute. As David Melech was running from Absalom, an important nobleman of Binyamin named Shimei ben Gerah cursed David in public, accused him of killing Shaul and his sons, and when David's soldiers made a move to execute him for his treasonous, I guess Judah is putting on mute for a minute, words, David would not allow it. And when the rebellion was over, Shimei came to beg for forgiveness. Once again, David chose not to execute. Remember, if somebody speaks against the king in Jewish law, you're actually allowed to kill them, which sounds pretty awful, but still is true. Sorry, I have to mute people because we're getting feedback, but feel free to unmute when you have something to say. Continuing on, the reason David gave was that his return as king should not be marred by execution, which could lead to a wave of vengeance. So that's good that he's like stopping the, retribution back and forth killing or retribution one against the other. But Shimei's actions should not go unpunished. David instructs his son Shlomo to find a clever way, and we know that Shlomo was considered very wise, to make sure that justice is served. And I read about that, I don't remember which book, but I think it had to do with the fact that he said, you must stay in Jerusalem. It's like house arrest, except it was city arrest. He said, as long as you stay in Jerusalem, don't go out, that'll be your punishment, which he did most of the time. But at some point, he actually left Jerusalem, and then he was killed because he did not fulfill his side of the bargain. Do not let him go unpunished, same thing. And then, Vayishkav David avotav, vayikaver be'ir David, he was buried in the city of David. And then it says this, 11, 12. 12 is where it stops. The length of David's reign over Israel was 40 years, 7 years in Hebron, 33 in Jerusalem. By the way, anybody here know how many years Shlomo HaMelech reigned? Also 40. I know, right? I look at you, Vivian, I'm like, that's what I said. Really? Oh, okay. I did not, like, I keep thinking of Shlomo as reigning for many, many, many years, but he actually reigned for 40 years. And during that time, he built the Beit HaMikdash. So does that mean he reigned from 12 for 40 years? Maybe he was crowned when he was older. I don't know. I have to look that up. Somebody has to be our historian here. I'm not that good at history, but I am doing 929, so hopefully I'll learn about that as I do it. And what was important was that when Shlomo sat on the throne of his king David, of his father David, his rule was firmly established. That was something that David felt was very important. By taking care of the difficult factions, by making sure that Shlomo was going to show his authority and in a clever way figure out what to do with Yoav and what to do with Shimei. That was how David felt that he was able to leave it intact. And just check and see if there's something else. That I wrote notes to myself. Oh, Uriah, not Uriah. Did I say Uriah? It's Uriah. That was Bathsheba's husband. Okay, so here's how one person finishes her summary of the parak. If we said before, a righteous person is considered to be alive, that never dies, as long after one dies, as long as that person's descendants follow in their path. In the cases of both David and Yaakov, they were laid to rest after seeing that their children would indeed follow in their righteous footsteps. Any other thoughts?
I have a thought too.
Please, Lance.
Okay, number one, there seems to be a contradiction between Jerusalem and the city of David. But the most glaring problem I have here is, why doesn't David repeat the instruction to Shlomo to build the temple?
That's a great question.
This is the last will and testament, as you correctly pointed out, and he's talking about revenge, and he's talking about helping people. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, is building a temple. The other thing is, how does he know that his son is going to be the Kohelet Chacham?
Why do you think how does he, not Kohelet, but how does he know that he's going to be wise? Maybe he already showed that he was very wise. I mean, why else would he be choosing him to be the king? I think he must have seen signs and seeds of that.
Because Nathan told him to.
Oh, right. That's a good point. Natan Hanavi said something. That's true. No, I get that, and I agree with you, and that for sure is the reason. But I agree with Lance that you still want to know that you're seeing signs of greatness in your child who the Navi told you, even if you have to follow what the Navi says.
And the city of David.
So I don't think I have an answer for you, Lance, but I think they're good questions.
Well, one more point. The city of David is behind me. And when I was in the city of David, I met an archaeologist who said that archaeologists digging in the city of David now believe that the temple was not on the mount, but both temples, Solomon and the second temple, were in the city of David because of the Gihon spring, and it would be impossible for the Kohanim to do their operations in a temple without a spring. There's also evidence that the Romans had a legion stationed on a temple mount.
Okay, wait. Let's just.
No, this is a very important argument. If you accept this argument, you got a lot of problems, serious problems.
But does that have to do with our Haftarah and the Torah portion?
Yes, it does, because David is buried in the city of David, and then the next thing you know, he's ruling in Jerusalem. What if there was no Jerusalem? What if there was only the city of David? I walked from the city of David to the Temple Mount. It took me 5 minutes. They're next to each other. Okay.
I'm not sure what your question is, but if you would like to send a link to that.
This doesn't make sense.
You think that the text doesn't make sense? Okay.
I think the text is corrupt. I think that most of the texts we read are corrupt. And I think
that is probably not something we're going to be dissecting in this class.
I'm sure we're not.
Because I don't have enough knowledge about that. But thank you
I
for
feel
saying that.
obligated to state it, that's all. Thank you. for
Okay,
giving me
I
the
hear that.
opportunity.
I understand because we're reading text and you're saying this text doesn't make sense to me.
And I'm a professor of literature.
I know.
So
Appreciate it.
that's, I mean,
Okay.
there's a whole,
I want to, let's finish with, I hear you and thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to finish with what I think Karen said. David, remember this song? Melech Yisrael, chai, chai, v'kayam. I think we learned it with thing. David, Melech Yisrael, chai, chai, right? Oh, look at Helen. How does it start? David, Melech Yisrael, chai. No, I'm doing it wrong. Anybody remember? Melech Yisrael. I can't remember what it is. Do you remember it? What the hands were? David, no. David, do you remember how to do it?
The only part I remember is that we used to start with 2 hand slaps on the tabletop down like this, and then you go into
David Melech Yisrael. You're right. Chai, that's how it works. Lekayam. David Melech Yisrael. Chai, chai. No, it still doesn't work. Okay. Whatever. If there is something, I'll have to remember it afterwards. Thank you, everybody, for attending and for your thoughts. And I hope when you go to shul or read the Parsha and the Haftarah, you will see the connection and feel that you learned something. And I look forward to continuing in Shemot next week. Bye, all. Have a good day. Take good care. Toda rabba. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek.